In today's video, I want to talk about vampire romance books and rate them from the least spicy to the most spicy that I have personally read. So hello my fellow fantasy book lovers and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi and welcome. My name is Kathy and I'm a goth girl from Belgium who loves to read fantasy books. The first book on my list is actually a young adult book, hence why it is at the lowest of the spice ratings. This one is called The Witch and the Vampire and it is more of a fantasy novel with a slight romance underplot with the two main characters, a witch and a vampire. It is a very soft, easy read. There isn't a lot happening. They hold hands near the end and they kiss, but that's about it. There is absolutely no amount of spice. It's more like at some points you could think it was more of a friendship relationship, but at the end it actually turns into they declaring that they are attracted to each other and actually want to be together, etc. So this book, The Witch and the Vampire, for me has 0 to 1 spice, considering if you would rate kissing and holding hands spice, but I personally don't. After that, a book that I found had little spice, but it happens at the very end of the book. It is good spice, don't get me wrong, but it was just not as present, is My Roommate is a Vampire. In this book, we follow a young girl who is renting an apartment, but the rent is too high, she cannot afford it, so she starts looking for a new place to live and she finds somewhere very cheap and she just moves in there and then later on discovers that the person that she's living with is a vampire. They are obviously attracted to each other, this is very clear from the beginning, and yeah, eventually at the very end they actually start kissing and doing a lot more than just kissing. So if you are not into spice, the end of this book might not be for you. If you want a lot of spice, this might also be too tame for you. I personally found it a good book, but not the best ever, and I give this a 1 to 2 on my spice rating. After that on my list is A Dowry of Blood. In this book we follow one of the brides of Dracula as she describes her life with him. The name Dracula is actually never mentioned in this book, but we get enough hints that we know it, and of course if you look more up about this book, it's clearly like the brides of Dracula. This book does have some spice, but the story is told from her perspective and she wants to really tell how cruel this man was and what he did and didn't do. So I find this book doesn't include as much spice as I first thought it would. This is by no means a heavily sexualized book. It is very traumatic at times. If you have been into a difficult controlling relationship in the past, I highly recommend reading this book. It was beautifully written. I really love this book and there is a little bit of spice happening every now and then, so I also gave it a 1 to 2 spice on my spice rating. After that I have Serpent and the Wings of Night. Now this book by Clarissa Broadbent I've only read recently. We have this very similar situation as we have in a lot of books where there is a younger girl who needs to enter a tournament, prove herself, and this particular girl actually has been raised by vampires without herself being a vampire. So she actually is in this contest, one of the other competitors and her get involved and spice happens. Now I do have to tell you that this was a very slow burn romance type situation, nothing happens until at least the second half of the book, but once it happens it is very good. So I personally really enjoyed this book. I think it was really well written and I personally gave this a 2 to 3 on my spice rating. Again, it doesn't happen into such an abundance that I give this a very high spice rating. However, the spice that happens is very good. And the same thing goes for 6 Scorched Roses. This is the follow-up book into the same world as Serpent and the Wings of Night. However, we follow 2 completely different characters. This book was one of my favorite recent reads, so if you haven't read it, I could highly recommend it. And no, you don't have to have read Serpent and the Wings of Night in order to enjoy this book. You do know more about the world if you have read Serpent and the Wings of Night, but it isn't completely necessary. In this book, we follow a young woman who tries decides to save her village where she lives because it has been cursed, and they are trying to find a solution for that curse, and therefore she goes to the local vampire, that's the best way to describe it, and she offers him a rose every time she comes there to draw his blood, and then she uses his blood to do experiments on. Of course, they get involved and more happens. This book, because it is so short, is also getting a higher spice rate because a lot more happens in a lot shorter time. It was very well written. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And again, this is getting a 2 to 3 spice because it is present a lot more proportionately to the other books, but it's not like as explicit as some of the books at the end of this list. After that, I want to give an honorable mention to Anne Rice's books. There are a lot of vampire books by Anne Rice, and depending on the book and which part of the book you're in, you will encounter spice as well. So depending if you're reading The Vampire Lestat or if you're reading Victorio, it depends on the character and their lives, because she basically tells their life story in her books, then you might have a lot of spice or not a lot of spice. And depending on the book, I would give Anne Rice's book, generally speaking, a 2 to 3 out of the spice rating. However, if you like Anne Rice's style, you will just binge through these books. They tend to be very descriptive, so if something happens, it is very precisely described. However, in some of the books also nothing happens. So if you are trying to read Anne Rice's books specifically for spice, I think you might be disappointed. Up next on my list is, in recent times, the most spicy series that I've read, and it is the Adrian X Isolde series. Currently, 2 books have been released and are out, and I have read them both, and the third one is on its way for release somewhere this year. So in the Adrian X Isolde, we follow Adrian, who is a vampire, and Isolde, who in the first book is the daughter of a kingdom, so a princess, and she needs to marry Adrian in order to make like a pact of peace between her kingdom and the one of Adrian. And spice actually gets involved pretty fast in this book. However, in the first book, at first there is a little bit of build-up. Do they trust each other? What will she allow? What won't she? And then near the end, it of course gets spicier and spicier. And then the second book, which is called Queen of Monsters, there it really escalates. It becomes a lot. So if you're into spice and very spice-heavy books, get the Adrian X Isolde. This one is focused more on the spice than the actual storytelling, and especially in book 2 I found the storyline a little lacking, but the spice really present and really pleasantly present, in my opinion, of course. So I personally give the Adrian X Isolde 3 and 4 stars out of my spice rating. Again, the first book I give 3 because it's less present, and the second one a definite 4 because it is very present. And then finally on my list, I had to include this series. It is the Anita Blake series by Laurel K. Hamilton. Anita Blake is a vampire hunter, necromancer, something. She does a lot of things in the books. And at first, she doesn't have a partner in the books, and then she ends up having like multiple partners, and a lot of spice starts happening in these books. So depending on the book you read, you might, if you have like the first few books, it might be a little more laid back and more chill, and spice will happen, but it's not super present. However, if you have book, I think it starts in book 5, it gets a lot more spice heavier, and then some books are just like plain spice and not much else happens. So it really depends on the books in this series. So if you're looking for something that has a lot of books to read, because I think there's over 30 right now, I would really recommend getting into the Anita Blake series by Laurel K. Hamilton. Very spice heavy, very nice vampires. I read up until book 20 when I was a little bit younger, so before I had my big break between reading, and I recently picked it up again. I'm currently at book 6, I believe, and yeah, it's just a very fun, light read. And if you want like multiple books that you can continue on in the same world, the same series, highly recommend them. So I personally give the Anita Blake series a 4 to 5 out of my spice ratings, because it depends on the book, but when it's there, oh, it is there, and you will know. So these were the vampire romance books that I have personally read and their spice ratings, going from the least spicy to the most spicy. I hope this list helps you whenever you're looking into getting more books that involve vampires. I personally love reading books with vampires and also vampire romance books. So if there's anything that wasn't on this list that you could recommend, I would love to know. So feel free to put them in a comment down below. And of course, if you have read any of these books, feel free to let me know if you agree on their rating and what you personally thought of them. If you haven't already and you'd like to be, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make new videos every week and I would love to have you here for every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!